The context of slavery in ancient Rome. Geographically and chronologically, slavery was always an integral element of Roman civilization and experience. Location and site. The growth of Rome from a small agricultural village built on 7 hills adjacent to the Tiber, struggling to maintain itself against its neighbours, to a world power dominating the whole Mediterranean basin cannot be explained by one factor alone. However, two aspects, location and site, contributed to its success. 1. Rome's location on the fertile plain of Latium, midway along the western side of the peninsula, and Italy's central location within the Mediterranean. 2. The geographical assets of the site of Rome. The largest and most fertile of Italy's plains, except for that of the Po in the north, all lay along the western side of the peninsula: Etruria, Latium, and Campania. These plains of the west supported dense populations of farmers who formed the reliable backbone of the Roman army, and since the centres of population were in the west, it was natural that Rome's first expansion beyond Italy, the Punic Wars against Carthage, should be into the western Mediterranean. The plain of Latium had an important geographical advantage. It was a junction of several great natural and direct routes to the surrounding regions, a route running north to Etruria and another south to Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece, or an area of southern Italy colonized by Greek city-states. Italy's central position in the Mediterranean basin gave access to the lands of the west, Spain and Gaul, south, North Africa, and later to the Hellenic East, or the Greek East. When Rome became an imperial power, this position made it easier to maintain control, while the Mediterranean Sea linked the provinces within the empire. Rome grew at a site on the river Tiber where volcanic outflows had produced a group of tightly knit hills which were easily defended by the early communities of shepherds and farmers. The Tiber not only gave the growing city access to the sea and further inland, but at the site of Rome there was an island in the river, the only one that allowed it to be easily crossed. Rome also had a central position as a road junction. The context of slavery, the historical context of slavery during the early Republic and the early Empire. The Republic. From 509 to 275 BCE, the establishment of the Roman Republic. From 509 to 275, while the new government struggled with a number of internal political issues, such as the conflict between the ruling class and the rest of the population, the city grew to become a dominant military and civil power in the Italian peninsula. From 496 to 275 BCE, through its military expansion within Italy, the social and political structure of the Republic gradually evolved, and slavery became more common. 264 to 201 BCE. The Romans became engaged in a series of wars against the Carthaginian Empire in the western Mediterranean. The First Punic War, 264 to 241, and the Second Punic War, 218 to 201. After the defeat of the Carthaginians in the Second Punic War, there were tens of thousands of slaves from former Carthaginian colonies in Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily available for Roman use. 200 to 146 BCE. In the 50 years after the Second Punic Wars, Rome became involved in events in Macedon, 4 wars, and in Greece. In 166, the Roman general Aemilius Paulus captured 150,000 people in Epirus. The Romans made the island of Delos into a free port, and it became the centre of a very lucrative slave trade. During this time, the Roman attitudes to overseas possessions hardened until 146. It totally destroyed the ancient trading cities of Corinth and Carthage in the Third Punic War. These wars established Rome as a dominant power in both the western and eastern Mediterranean. 476 to 78 BCE. After destruction of Carthage, it is believed that around 30,000 men and 25,000 women were enslaved. It has been estimated that there were approximately 250,000 prisoners of war taken by the Romans in the first half of the 2nd century BCE. Before the end of the 2nd century BCE, Rome had 7 provinces, and all aspects of Roman urban and rural life were affected, from rural land use, the size of properties, food supply, population structure, employment, family life, living conditions, trade, business, entertainment, religion, and education. But these foreign influences widened the gap between rich and poor as the wealthy brought up vast tracts of land and replaced the free agricultural labourers with slaves. Those displaced flocked to Rome, leading to overpopulation, food and housing shortages, and violence. As vast amounts of wealth flowed into the hands of the upper classes, the demand for household slaves increased, and many were sent to work in the mines and in chain gangs on large estates. This exploitation led to a serious slave uprisings in Sicily and Italy. The First Slave War occurred in Sicily in 135 to 132 BCE. The changes brought about by conquest highlighted some of the weaknesses in the republican form of government and the inability of its ruling class to adjust to changing conditions. Landless peasants, unable to compete with slave labour, flocked to Rome and joined the ranks of the urban mob demanding land reform. The Second Slave War in Sicily occurred in 104 to 100 BCE. A reform of the Roman army into a professional fighting force also changed the political scene throughout the empire. 78 to 28 BCE. Piracy had become a serious problem in the Mediterranean. With well-organised fleets, they raided and plundered the length and breadth of the Mediterranean. As well as disrupting regular commerce, they operated a lucrative slave trade, kidnapping and then selling captives at the slave market on Delos. The Roman government at first turned a blind eye since wealthy Roman landowners employing slaves made a profit out of the pirates' trade. The Third Slave War occurred in Italy between 73 to 71 BCE. This was the most serious of the slave uprisings led by Spartacus, and it inspired fear in the Romans. Between 67 and 62, the great general Pompey ended piracy when it threatened Rome's grain supply and added more provinces in the east. A ring of provinces around the coastline from the southern shore of the Black Sea to Syria. Between 58 and 51 BCE, Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, which became the province of Gallia Comata. He is said to have conquered 800 towns and captured 1 million people. Caesar's power caused resentment among the nobility, and he was assassinated in 44 BCE by a group of senators in the Senate House. The years 44 to 28 saw Caesar's heir, Octavian, fight for the future of the empire against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, eventually annexing Egypt as an imperial province in which slavery was to play a large future role. Octavian adopted the name Augustus Caesar and instituted a new political order, the Principate, or rule of the first citizen. The early empire, 27 BCE to 200 CE. Augustus Caesar became the first emperor of Rome and ruled until his death in 14 CE. He reformed the laws of the city and the provinces, secured Rome's borders, initiated vast building projects, and set in place a time of relative peace and prosperity, the Pax Romana, throughout the empire, which lasted for almost 200 years. Slavery continued to be a vital part of the social and economic life of the imperial society, and because of the upper classes realized their complete reliance on them, there were more legal regulations made concerning the treatment of slaves. Two laws passed in 2 CE, the Lex Fufius Canina, and 4 CE, the Lex Alia Sentia, were passed on the request of the Emperor Augustus to place certain restrictions on the manumission or freeing of slaves, since the number of manumissions at the end of the Republic and beginning of the Empire was so large as to affect the social system at the time. Augustus's successors, Tiberius, Gaius or Caligula, Claudius and Nero, ruled as the Julio-Claudians, and during the reign of Claudius, Britain was added to the empire as the province of Britannia, 43 CE, a source of further slaves and wealth, and between 44 and 46 he annexed Judea and Thrace, the empire. Also during his reign, he established an imperial bureaucracy that employed a large number of freed slaves or freedmen in administrative positions. Some became quite influential and wealthy. Although there were no longer any slave revolts as in the Republic, there were still runaways, and during the reign of Nero, 61 CE, there was a notorious case that involved the murder of the city official Pedanius by one of his slaves, which led to the Senate's controversial decision to execute his entire slave household. In 69 CE, a Jewish rebellion was put down by Emperor Vespasian, and the conquest of his son Titus produced 97,000 slaves and the steady expansion of the empire. The empire grew stronger, and slaves had to be found from sources other than conquests. The institution of slavery continued for the remainder of the Roman Empire, even during a time of Christian influence. More slaves entered Rome when the barbarian Visigoths and Germans entered Roman territory and brought the Western Roman Empire to an end in 476 CE. Two events that changed the Roman world: the destruction of Carthage and Corinth in 146 BCE. These were the events that played a transformative role in the future of Rome and changed the nature of slavery and number of slaves in Roman society. The city of Carthage had dominated the Western Mediterranean both politically and economically, while Corinth was the powerhouse commercial city in the Eastern Mediterranean. Carthage had already been stripped of its Sicilian and Spanish territories, but by 146 BCE, Rome's attitudes had hardened. In the same year, they totally destroyed both Carthage in northern Africa and Corinth in Greece, giving Rome access to untold wealth and hordes of slaves. Polybius also recorded that the great Roman general Scipio Aemilianus, when he looked upon the city of Carthage as it was utterly perishing and in the last throes of its complete destruction, it is said to have shed tears and wept openly for his enemies. And the following is an account of the Greek city of Corinth in 146 BCE, cited in Pausanias' description of Greece. At first, though the gates were open, Mummius hesitated to enter Corinth, suspecting an ambush had been laid within the walls. But on the third day after the battle, he proceeded to storm both Corinth and set it on fire. The majority of those in it were put to the sword by the Romans, but the women and children Mummius sold into slavery. He also sold all the slaves who had been set free and fought on the side of the Achaeans or Greeks, but had not fallen on the field of battle. The most admired votive offerings and works of art were carried off by Mummius.